There have been some studies in the past which have tried to make sense of how much fake news costs us as an economy. And there's various places where fake news has a clear public policy implication. So there's obviously financial misinformation, and financial misinformation tends to have certain patterns, such as it peaks around some kind of a crisis. So you can say something like Yes Bank starting to unravel, saw a huge spike in the amount of fake news about not just Yes Bank, but other kinds of financial misinformation, and that has a significant cost. There's obviously reputational cost to brands when there is fake news about them. Again, that can be hard to estimate. An Israeli study last year made a claim that it was in the range of about $75 billion a year that it's costing us in terms of fake news. But of course, the one that is probably most significant today, in today's day, is fake news as it relates to health. And the costs are even more difficult to estimate, because how do you measure the cost of lives lost? What you can measure, of course, is the extent to which certain kinds of public policy initiatives are undercut by the existence of fake news. At the end of the day, fake news has something to do with our predisposition to believe something, and that predisposition to believe something can either come out of some kind of market uncertainty or existential economic uncertainty. So you'll believe something when you don't know what else to turn to. Your rumor is your best guide. Or else you might believe something because you have a political predisposition to believe something. So great example in the case of COVID was that when the COVID crisis began, a lot of the fake news was about China, Chinese people, and their practices, which may lead to the then referred to Wuhan virus, later referred to as COVID-19. And these were basically negative messaging about Chinese people, what they eat, how they behave, and how that might result in the virus. And some of these were also, of course, attached to how India might be immune from it because we don't have the same kinds of practices. One interesting thing was a spike in fake news about vegetarianism and how vegetarian diets may be a buffer against COVID-19 kind of diseases, which is of course not true. And what you see is that early in the COVID crisis, you had a lot of fake news about cures and statistics about fake news. And as the crisis progressed, those started to decline in favor of more fake news, which was driven emotionally rather than driven factually. And by that, what I mean is that there are certain things that you can factually figure out. You can say that, okay, garlic cures coronavirus. You can try eating all the garlic that you want or drinking all the cow urine and then find out that it doesn't work. And then that's the end of that in some sense, for the most part. But the interesting thing that happened in the COVID case was right after the Tablighi Jamaat case broke in early April, a lot of the fake news that was happening in India moved from being about things that you could factually refute to things that were a little bit more hazy and had emotional appeal. So the ecosystem for believing that a certain community has something to do with the problems of the country were already in place, and therefore the kinds of fake news which were more appealing also moved to that. So essentially, to counter fake news, we also need to think about what is it that we are willing to believe and how that might further push certain kinds of fake news. To some extent, tech platforms often benefit from fake news because, especially if fake news is going viral, then that virality ends up aiding the use of that platform itself. And so tech platforms have been a little bit cagey about fake news. Also, like country to country, there is differences in regulation of how you manage fake news. In the United States, for instance, where a lot of the fake news discussion was in play during the Trump election. Basically, freedom of speech laws would suggest that you can say whatever you want, even if you know it to be untrue, because that is your right. And so then you can't regulate that effectively in certain places, whereas in certain other places, you may be able to regulate that. But then the question is, where is the data originating? How much of that are you within a certain jurisdiction to regulate? So it is a really tricky problem. And what makes it more tricky is that those who might have the best ability to regulate the problem might have not only least incentive to regulate it, but also different legal obligation to regulate it from place to place.